Hello, I'd like to talk to you about prohibition and talk about the economics, what we would expect to happen if something was prohibited. In fact, came across an article, as it mentions up here, that caffeine is one of the two most widely used psychoactive drugs on Earth. Well, that sounds like an incentive to prohibit it. So let's look at what would happen if we prohibited it. That is, the argument would be we want to restrict the use, and by restricting the use, we can increase public health. So let's draw a line, because one thing we would expect it to do is to affect the supply and demand, and specifically, normally what the government's going to do to prevent exchange of, in this case, caffeine, is it will normally go after sellers. Sellers are normally easier to go after than buyers, but often they will go after both. But let's say right now they go after sellers. Well, what that's going to do is shift the supply curve to the left, decrease in supply. And what a decrease in supply is going to do is, let me get out my pen here. Let's see if I can get it up here, right here. Here's our new supply curve. We have a new equilibrium price. Price went up. So notice what happens. Supply went down. Price goes up. But the whole reason they did that was to improve public health by restricting the use of caffeine. So here's our restriction, so lower quantity. Now if they had gone after buyers, what we would expect to happen is the demand curve would have gone down, in which case we'd have supply and demand curve both going down, and in which case price could have gone up or gone down. Normally we might expect a slightly higher price. But in this case, by raising the cost, it makes it so law of demand, people buy less of it. So just focusing on going after sellers so far. Also, another thing that's likely to happen is now that the market's illegal, so let's talk about the next effect is it's illegal. So for example, prohibition of alcohol, you had Budweiser. Now that it's illegal, Budweiser got pretty much out of the alcohol business. And you had people like Al Capone or criminals. Oops. So I'll write criminals here. Go into the market. So criminals enter the market. Well, criminals often will be people who have a little bit better ability at avoiding detection and prosecution. They also, because now they can't go to the court system if they don't get paid, or buyers can't go to the court system if they don't get a good product, often they'll resort to violence to enforce contracts. And so it means people who are especially good at violence will tend to enter the market. So it becomes a little bit more risky to buy your caffeine. And also to avoid prosecution, you'll often find that instead of kind of caffeine that you might find in Coca-Cola, it probably will go into a much more concentrated form, such as after prohibition of alcohol, you had much less beer and wine and much more moonshine, hard liquors, because it's easier to sell a much more concentrated variety. So drug dealers don't normally sell opium, but much more valuable and concentrated heroin. So you expect to see very concentrated caffeine in this case. Hopefully that doesn't create a jolt for the market. Likewise, if users receive the same penalty, and if users receive the penalty, remember, I'm going to draw a new curve over here. Let's see if I can find my cursor. There it is. So here's my demand curve. Here's quantity. Here's price. Supply curve. Equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium price. Now let's do a new line. Let's turn it blue. And now let's make it so both buyers and sellers are gone after. But if it's buyers, demand curve shifts down, because now if I'm going after you, you tend to buy less. If sellers are, as we see up here, if they go after sellers, supply curve, both of them decrease. Both of that case are going against buyers and sellers, decreasing. Notice I drew it so the price stayed the same, but if the effect on sellers was much bigger, price would have gone up. if the effect on buyers is much bigger, the price would have gone down. But to avoid detection, what we tend to find is people tend to use more of a concentrated version. I'm going to go back to red. So it tends to be more concentrated. As we just mentioned. But also to avoid detection, it's also, you tend to have binging. And also, to avoid doing something illegal, go where it's legal. Go to Canada. Maybe Canada didn't outlaw their caffeine. Go where legal. So a lot of people during Prohibition went to Mexico, Canada, they went offshore. Next thing we would expect to see is, it's hard to create a brand identity of saying, I have very high quality products. So we tend to find lower quality. A lot of people died from alcohol poisoning during the Prohibition. So lower quality. So these are some of the things that we would expect to see. And so in this case, as we just mentioned, quick summary, supply curve shifts to the left because going after sellers causes price to go up, quantity to go down, as we see over here. Somewhere over here, right there. Now it's illegal. Criminals tend to enter the market. Criminals often have a greater ability to for more violence. So let's put violence in between here. So more violence, as we talked about, tends to be more concentrated to avoid detection, more binging behavior. People go where it's legal. We tend to have lower quality. And looking at this graph right here, quick discussion of that one. Notice supply went down and price, in fact, price goes up when supply goes down, quantity goes down. Also, demand went down. If we go after buyers, well, if demand goes down, let's draw a better D for demand, price would tend to go down and quantity would tend to go down. Both of these would tend to imply lower quantity. We're getting people to use less caffeine, whole purpose of it. But notice, we're not exactly sure if we have the two effects, what's going to happen to price. If we could get it so no one wants caffeine, well, then you won't be able to sell it, very low price. If you can get it so there's very little available, people still want it, well, the price is going to go up. So we don't know what's going to happen to price if we have both go after buyers and sellers. And so those are some of the things that we would expect when we prohibit a good. Does it mean you should always not prohibit? Not necessarily. It just means that there's trade-offs. When you try to do one thing of getting people to use less of something they still want, then there tends to be a trade-off. There tends to be some unintended consequences of some of these other things, such as binging behavior, violence, and some other things.